Hi everyone, welcome to part one of Behind the Curtain, exposing the concealed light of Tznius. And I hope you all like to play on words there. So we're going to kind of go behind the scenes to expose the true value of Tznius. And hopefully, the goal is that once you recognize the importance of your role in Tznius and what it's doing, you won't look at the mitzvah the same way. We're in the middle of the Adorn with Dignity classes, and the top two questions that are coming to me is really how fast should I be, moving into the mitzvah of Tznius, and which part of Tznius should I take on first? And the truth is that, the answer really varies. But the one-size-fits-all answer that I think, everyone is always looking for the one-size-fits-all answer. And the truth is that learning about Tznius helps to ensure that you are successful in Tznius. Because there's a lot of times people say, how fast should I go in order that I don't, chuck this away in 2 months and then I'm done with it. And the truth is, again, when you're learning about why you're doing, discovering why you're covering, again, it makes it that much harder to even utter those kinds of words. Has v'shalom, that anyone takes on Tznius and decides this isn't for me. I think when you really recognize the importance of it, very difficult to say. So we're going to get into Tznius as it relates to clothing, and some of the text written from our sages that kind of gives you that foundation. So that you don't think I'm just making this up. There's a lot written about this. So we're going to get into the clothing part. We're going to get also into the three really levels of, and I don't want to say really branches of Tznius, and why sometimes when a question comes out about, is this dress okay? Are these shoes okay? Why that answer can differ. And this really, this is why it's important for you to study and to understand what is permissible to you. And that is, dat Moshe, dat Yehudi, and then minhag hamakom. So dat Moshe is really that, what is the oraita, what is coming from the Torah. And then dat Yehudi is the fences, which is coming from the Rabbanim. And then on top of that, you have what's called minhag hamakom, which means what is really acceptable in your parts of the woods. So what may be acceptable, for instance, in New York, may not be acceptable in Lakewood, may not be acceptable in Muncie, may not be acceptable in Florida. So, or vice versa. So, you have to really understand what's permissible to you, because regardless to where you are in those three levels, you always have to stay within the guidelines. So once you know what the guidelines are, it's kind of easier to navigate, and it really helps you to gain that confidence when you're not only shopping or picking something, but that you're going outside and unequivocally this is okay. I'm okay. So we're going to get into that aspect of it. We're also going to get into some of the behaviors, because Tznius is not just about the way you're dressing. It's also about the way you're acting. And of course, there's Kisur Rosh, which I may touch on, but because we're doing the series of Adorn with Dignity, you may want to refer back to that, because that's very much in detail. So I don't really feel the need to keep going back into that, but we may bring it up because, my tichel and me, we're just so, we're attached at the head, literally. So we're going to get into it. We're going to get into part one, and we're going to take you all the way back to the beginning about the creation of woman, and what the purpose was. What was the intention behind the creation of woman in Hashem's mind? So let's get into it now. And as we know, every morning when we daven, we start out and we say Baruch atah Hashem, Melech haolam, for having made me according to His will. So I've mentioned this before in a few other shiurim, that this statement here, this whole let us make man, the whole conversation of let us make man, is also something that a lot of the goyim that follow the religion of Yoshka like to come in looking for a proof that Yoshka was part of the us of this whole conversation, let us make man. And again, I've said it before, that the conversation was not Chas v'shalom, between Hashem and Yoshka, that it was between Hashem and the 10 emanations, the emanations being that which is required to actually form man, the fire, the water, etc. And so when it came to the making of man, this conversation took place. But when it came into the decision to make a woman, this conversation, it did not have anyone else involved. It was purely through Hashem's, not only his contemplation, but his deep meditation. He really put a lot of thought into the creation of woman. And, we see this very clearly, not only in just, the fact that he's looking for a helpmate for Adam, but from where he took us from, which was the rib. So now a lot of people may say, why the rib? There may have been other parts of the body we think could have been, in our mind, a better choice to take and create woman from, right? So don't think that Hashem didn't go through this conversation, and he did go through it. And it's he starts out that he actually went through the body parts, and he thought about the head. And when he came to the head, he thought about it and thought, maybe this would be a great idea. She could be a great thinker, have great ideas. And then he thought, and he said, no, not going to work, because then she could become arrogant. From the head also comes arrogance, right? We always think that we're doing things. It's because of our koyak and strength that things are happening. So he thought this would not be a good idea. So then he came down to the eye. And he said, why not? She can really appreciate the beautiful things that I've created. And he turned around and he said, no, that's not going to be a good idea either. Because from the eye comes curiosity and the tendency to be nosy, right? And, I already have this problem. All the things are going to be listed. I know I've suffered from. So he thought this would not be a good idea. So then he came down to the mouth and he said, she could speak beautiful words of divrei Torah. She can, really give a lot of hizuk to people. And then he thought better of it. And he said, no, from the mouth comes gossip and lashon hara. And she may have a tendency to speak a lot of nonsense nonstop. So this isn't going to be a good idea either. So from there, he said, what about the heart? The heart. Everyone is supposed to love Hashem with all your heart, right? And then he said, no, this will not do. This will not be good. It doesn't sum up her essence. And through the heart comes jealousy and envy. So that's not going to be a good idea. So then he went down, he said, what about the hands? So, the hands, you need the hands to perform the mitzvot, right? Without your hands, it's very difficult to perform any of the mitzvot. And he said, no, because this, she'll have a tendency to be possessive and in everyone's affairs. She'll be like a busybody, always in everyone's affairs. And being, in everyone's affairs, not so great, It's bad enough, we're so busy making a muck of our own affairs, let alone when we get into other people's affairs, oy vavoy, then we really got some trouble going on. So it says, he went down to the leg, and then he said, no, from the leg, she can carry herself in a very arrogant manner, so this will not do. So at that point, he was really trying to figure out what part would really sum up the essence of what a woman is, what her job is, and what is her true essence? What is she going to be about? So he decided, I'll take her from the rib. So now, again, we still think, why the rib? So the rib, we know that even if you are erva, whether you're naked, that the rib remains concealed. But more than that, not only is it concealed, but it protects. It protects all of the vital organs that are within the ribs. And thus, this is the essence of every woman. It is not only the concealment, but the protection. So the woman in turn was created with really one of, I think, in my opinion, the most important job. Because through her concealment, her being concealed, she not only facilitates the process of that connection with Hashem, but she protects all that is vital about Yiddishkeit. And we know this from time and time again. The women have constantly risen up to the occasion. They have constantly been involved in saving the day. I think there are so many stories where we see the woman has come forward. And really, we know that without the women, that has v'shalom, that Yiddishkeit could not have survived. It's through the women that it survives. So now I mentioned facilitating this process of connecting with Hashem. And in essence, what we are is we are the conduit. We are the pipeline to not only to have Hashem's presence in our home, but also to be the pipeline of bracha. But there must be this prerequisite in place. And we're going to get into that in a second. But when we first see that Hashem wanted to dwell among us, he asked us to build the Mishkan. So like any construction project, you would think that, when you're starting to build something, the foundation is first, the beams are first, the walls, anything else. But instead, the first thing that Hashem instructs to make are the curtains. The curtains. Usually that's the last thing, right? But no. So now we mentioned the prerequisites, and if you've been to college or you know that there are certain classes, advanced classes, you cannot get to that state without having this prerequisite class. And that's the best example really I can give. So really the prerequisite is just what is required in order for you to go forward. So without this protection and concealment in place, there is no prerequisite. And therefore, again, like we mentioned, the pipeline in essence becomes obstructed. And so the Gemara states that because the woman is the pipeline and the key, without this, the man cannot obtain the fullest potential of a mitzvah. So in essence, the way you should think of it is really a barrel that kind of has a huge hole in it. And, he can be pouring in a lot of bracha, but if there is a hole, if the woman is lacking, and I think that's a lot of times the way they describe it is that the lack of tznius, it shows that she's lacking in the bracha. It's going to be very hard to hold on to those blessings. It's almost like, you ever try to hold water in your hand? It'll fall out through the sides. It'll fall out through the cracks of them. This is kind of what happens when this prerequisite is not in place. So now to get just slightly deeper, I'm going to mention just a little bit of the Kabbalistic side of it, and I'm not going to go into this a lot, for the simple fact is that this is really a shir that's kind of going on to people of all levels. And, I always say it's good to have a foundation. I think a lot of times people want to get into the esoteric things of Judaism. Without a strong foundation, it's just not a good idea. But to kind of prove this point that, the woman really is the conduit of this, meeting place per se, this facilitating this connection with Hashem, we're going to get into a little bit of the Kabbalistic side. So the Kabeh, the Kuf Bet Lamed, appears 15 times in the 5 books of Moshe, and it's limited to 2 verses in Exodus, both referring to the tapestry that is hung over the Mishkan, again, meaning those curtains, which is really the tent of meeting, or known as the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So moreover, Hashem is saying, 50 loops shall you make in the one curtain, and 50 loops shall you make in the edge of the curtain, that is in the second coupling. And the loop shall correspond, meaning being parallel from the root, the kuf bet lamed, again, that's the word that's appearing, to one another, like a woman towards her sister. And mekabel is really like the receiver and denotes this female quality. So here we see that the woman is the receiver of this meeting place. So, again, as a side note, it's very interesting to know that there's like a little machloket of how the curtains, whether the people held them up while they were constructing inside, or whether it was held up, by Hashem's help. And who knows, it could have been the same way that when Moshe wanted to raise the Mishkan, he said, I can't. And Hashem said, you busy your hands with what you have to do, and I will raise it up. And yet Moshe got the credit anyway. So I wonder if this is like kind of the same thing that was going on. So now curtains, when we think about curtains, what do? They block out, they conceal. They conceal what's going on in the inside. So here we see that once we have this concealment, right, and this female aspect, the concealment, then we have the prerequisite. Once we have the prerequisite, then we have a proper vessel to hold the bracha. So now, as we know, in this generation, we have a really, really horrendous phenomenon happening where we're starting to see that the prerequisite is almost being done away with altogether, where we see women not only not meeting the basics of Tznius, but even worse than that is that the men, HaShem, that they're kind of encouraging a lot of their wives to be in this non-tzniut status. And, the Gemara goes out of its way to really not only give the incentive of why you should be tzniut and why your husband should want you to be tzniut, and it also goes out of its way to tell you what is really being said about this in Shemayim. So in Baba Masiya, it says that a man should take great care to honor his wife even more than he honors himself. Because again, we know that she's the pipeline and the blessing, with that asterisk, meaning that prerequisite has to be in place. And this is also repeated in Yevamot, that Tznius is the key. So the Maharal also comments that Tznius is an indicator whether there's a bracha in the home. So it's funny because, we're going to get into behaviors, but you ever notice how you go to a Rav and they almost seem like, wow, where did you get all this wisdom? It's almost like they can see things, and it's because they know these things, right? So they know right away just by looking at a couple whether there's a bracha in the house, whether the prerequisites are being met. And right away they know if there's problems coming in the house, this is what's going on. If you ever notice too, this is also the reason why that if Has v'shalom, that a negative decree is coming against a person, or that it's coming against a town or an area, you ever notice that the Rebbeinu always say, everyone always asks, what should we be doing? What should we be doing? And everyone says, should we make Tehillim groups? And what do they say? No, raise up in Tznius, because they understand that there is a gaping hole in which the bracha and the protection is now slipping through. If that's not in place, it's literally, it's open season. Has v'shalom, it's open season. So now we talked about, the Gemara, saying the incentive for a man to want to have his wife be a tznuah. But I think sometimes what is less known is what the Gemara is saying about when your wife is not tznuah, or when any girl is not tznuah, what is really being said. And the Gemara mentions two things. And the first thing, which I got to tell you that when I heard it some time ago, it was funny because just hearing it, I felt such a busha that I was literally red, because I couldn't believe that, that what I'm about to say. And it says that the heavenly courts, that any woman that lifted her skirt, or in other words, whether she wore a skirt, and we're not talking about, you have to lift it up to put your pantyhose, but it was that she wore a skirt, which is considered lifting it up above her knees, was called a pulsa. Now, pulsa is a prostitute. And when I heard this, I just felt this sense of shame and embarrassment, because literally what they're saying, there was a time that, even things like exotic dancers and things of that nature was such a shameful trade. And you would see all these college girls that somehow they were getting involved with this in order to pay their way through college. And you would hear the stories of how frightened they always were to be found out. And, and the horrendous embarrassment that some of them would have when they were found out, when somebody walked in and saw them this way. But this is essentially what's going on day in and day out. It's like your father walking in in the middle of you on stage as a exotic dancer. This is literally like how serious it is. And I remember hearing that and thinking, I don't know how I can go outside again, knowing that has v'shalom, that if I go outside with a skirt like that, that's what the Beit Din and Shemaim is going to be calling me. Even more scary than that. I mean, again, this is why it amazes me that husbands do not encourage their wives to be tzniut, because it says something also about the man as well, which I think is even more scarier. And it says that to the tzaddik goes the tsunua, but to the rasha goes the pulsa. So this is almost like, you've already told your whole story before you've even met the Rav. You can go to meet the Rav for the first time, and you've already told a whole story. And it's like being exposed in the worst way possible. But yet this is being repeated day after day after day after day. And that's just the first observation. It wasn't even like he got into your story. That's just right there, like what we call in court, prima facie, which means at face value. At face value, already, not only did it say something about the woman, but it said something about the man. Very, very scary. But speaking of observation, the Gemara says in Nidarim, it tells a story, and it says that any man who gazes at the heel, and the Gemara, they really try to use nice language, but what it means here is the thigh of a woman. But it says that any man that looked at the heel of a woman for pleasure, his children will be inappropriate. And it's funny because, again, here we go with the observation of what the Rebbeinu can see without even knowing, without you speaking a word, what they can see about your whole story, your whole life. And, the story actually goes out to mention a boy, and who the sages said that they knew that he was conceived in such a low state, that the parents were in a low state, based upon his behavior. So here we go. Again, we're going on this play on words, but talk about something being concealed that's so revealed. Like you think you did something in the dark, but even in there, HaShem is there, right? Even in the darkness, there you are, right? We know that in Tehillim. So it's funny because the comparison here is something so revealed, being conceived in a low state. And we know that really anything that is of high value, we tend to conceal it. We tend to conceal this. HaShem being the greatest example of this, where he is constantly concealed, constantly. And so the fact that HaShem has created the woman with the same essence, and he really contemplated this, really goes to show the value of a woman, not only the value of a woman, but a value of a woman in Klal Yisrael. So now this is going to bring up our closing thought and our closing question for part one. And the thing that I guess stays on my mind is, if the women are so revealed and they're not concealed, why is it that they don't know their value? Why is it that they don't know their value? So we're going to close with that. And tomorrow we're going to talk about the behaviors that we see in people in our day-to-day that kind of bring some of this out. Because there's a lot of times where we learn about these things. We learn about them, which I always like to say, anything you learn like out of the book or out of a shir is really the chachma. But when you go through it and you see it played out, this is more like the binah, which is the understanding. You have an understanding of what you learned. And then there goes that dot, right? That's really that you know something, because you have this, not only the knowledge, but you have the experience behind it. Hence, I always say going to the rodeo, or more time, whenever you've been around the block. And this really goes to talk about the experience of a person. So Besrat Hashem, in the next lesson, we're going to get into, this horrendous phenomenon of women not seeing their value, because I think if they did, they would be concealed, because again, HaShem being the most valuable thing is the most concealed, and we are made really with that thought in mind. So that's it for today, and I hope we'll all be together again soon. Besrat Hashem.